began sending machines like these in ever-growing numbers on night raids against German cities. But such massive air power had not always been available.
The giant bombers, they're being loaded up for the night's work.
Back in 1940, the RAF had been equipped with planes like the Hampden, the Wellington, the Whitley, and the Blenheim.
The British Empire is building up a tremendous bomber force designed as the offensive air weapon to smash the heart of Germany.
But despite appearances to the contrary, none was suitable for long-range bombing by night. This, meanwhile, was the pride of the German bomber fleet, the Heinkel HE-111. Like its RAF counterparts of the time, it had a short range, a slow cruising speed, and a small payload at 4,500 pounds, just 1/5 of the bomb weight later carried by the Lancaster. The Germans had first used bombers to make attacks on military targets in direct tactical support of troops on the ground. Luftwaffe crews were trained for precision raids, often made at low level and always in daylight. But in September 1940, there came a change. Heavy daylight losses of German bombers during the Battle of Britain forced a switch to the night. For the German bomber crews, all this came as quite a shock.
A switch from tactical bombing by day, for instance, in support of the army, to night bombing implicated in a certain way a new philosophy. Bombing of factories meant to us that we were engaged now in a higher degree of warfare. And that from the beginning was not really our hobby, so to speak. The attitude of the crew were not so much enthusiastic. Were not enthusiastic about night bombing. The whole satisfaction of a bomber pilot is, of course, to see what he has done, whether he has hit his target or failed.
Indeed, hitting a target at night remained the biggest problem for the bomber forces on both sides throughout the war. First, you had to find the target. And in 1940, navigation was very much by guess and by God.
England! Black as pitch down there!
Mind the blackout, dear.
Anybody would think I was signaling to the enemy.
Hey, cheer up, Heinrich. What's wrong? We are on our course, aren't we? Subject to drift. This infernal wind will blow us off our course if I can't see something to check up by.
Jeder Flug wurde sorgsam vorbereitet, wofür es Formulare gab, wofür man dann auch bei Abweichungen den Wind abholen musste von der Wetterstelle. Der Wind wurde angegeben nach den verschiedenen Höhen, alle 500 Meter, nach Richtung und Stärke. Und danach wurde der Kurs berechnet.
Wir sind 6 Grad links vom Kurs. 10 Minuten Verbesserungszeit.
Aber sonst war es unsere Aufgabe, die des Beobachters eben, dann den Kurs neu zu berechnen und dem Flugzeugführer diesen neuen Kurs anzugeben, nachdem er dann zu fliegen hatte. Als Beispiel, dass einmal das auch ausgefallen war bei uns und der Flugzeugführer hatte so eine Art Blackout und fiel aus den Wolken und fing dann die Maschine wieder. Das war bei einem Angriff auf Liverpool-Birkenhead, dass er auf einmal einen Kurs nach Amerika hatte. Und es waren die Kompasse ausgefallen. Wir hatten ja manchmal Temperaturen von minus 50 Grad und dann fielen etliche Geräte aus. Und dann musste man sehen, wie man zurechtkam. Jedenfalls kamen wir dann so etwa mit dem letzten Liter Sprit noch nach Hause.
Look! Excellent!
The navigation by night was quite a problem, and I think the Bomber Command, the British Bomber Command, has experienced it in the same way.
Da, die englische Küste.
Against England, against the island, it was not so difficult as Bomber Command had it against Germany. For we learned that there's no British place on the island which is more than 80 kilometers from the coast. So you had to find out a certain point at the coast and then mark it quite precisely, and then from there you could march on from the east, of course, to the west and look upon the, for instance, Sheffield, I would say, would take a time of 10 minutes or so from the coast.
The Germans turned rapidly to electronics to help get their bombers onto the target. The method was simple. The crews were guided by two long-range radio beams broadcasting from transmitters in occupied France.
Achtung, Anflug! Achtung, Anflug!
They flew down one beam. As they crossed the second beam, they released their bombs.
Noch etwas rechts. Halt. Achtung. Hoch.
Bombe fällt. Volltreffer.
Prima.
The system was called Knickerbein. Early versions were quickly jammed by the British, but a more advanced type was not. This was called the X system.
Und der Beobachter bekam also von der Seite, im Idealfall musste das so etwa bei 90 Grad liegen, nicht? Das also dieses System entsteht. Da flog der Flugzeugführer und von da kam das Signal zum Auslösen der Bomben.
The Germans couldn't direct every aircraft using this method, so they equipped a special squadron. Its job? To go ahead of the main bomber force and mark the target accurately with flares and incendiaries. A new type of night air warrior was born, the Pathfinder. By the end of the Blitz in March 1941, German bombing had taken its toll on over 20 towns and cities throughout the length and breadth of Britain. The lives of a generation had been disrupted. 40,000 civilians had died. The RAF, meanwhile, struck back at German cities. And of course, they encountered the same problems of navigation and accuracy. But at the time, neither commanders nor aircrew could accept just how inaccurate their night raids were.
Well, the airless raids were a complete and utter waste of time. In the first 2 years of the war, we couldn't find targets. We'd only a compass and an airspeed indicator. There was no electronics. It was quite impossible.
Hello, Mac. Where are we now, as though you're likely to know?
I can't find where we are. We're coming to Karlsruhe. Famous for its breweries, you know.
Good old Mac.
So the only information that we had really was the wireless operator who on his 1155 equipment that could give us some very doubtful signals. And the VHF, where we could get some bearings from the stations from time to time. But this was a very sparse information, and it was a lot of by guess and by God, I'm afraid, in those days.
So inaccurate were the British that in Germany, rumours grew as to why particular targets never seemed to be bombed.
Von Flensburg wird behauptet, König Christian von Dänemark hätte in England interveniert, um die einwohnerstarke dänische Minderheit in Flensburg von Bombenangriffen zu verschonen. In Merseburg ging ein besonders kurioses Gerücht um. Dort habe die Schwester des Grafen Luckner ein Haus gehabt und der Graf Luckner habe auf einer Seefahrt einmal Churchill das Leben gerettet und so wäre das Haus der Schwester des Grafen Luckner und damit die Stadt Merseburg, die in der Nähe der großen Farbenwerke von Leuna lagen, nie bombardiert worden. Die Menschen hofften auch darauf, dass sie nicht bombardiert würden. Man sprach von Flugblättern, die nie gedruckt worden sind. Heidelberg, die wollen wir schonen, denn hier wollen wir wohnen. Ähnliches erzählt man sich von Bonn, von Godesberg, von bestimmten Stadtteilen von Kassel und von Hannover.
Punch from the last sortie, sir.
Thank you. What are they like?
Very good, sir.
Thank you very much. That's fine.
You know, this is most interesting. They've done a most tremendous amount here. It's a colossal installation now.
By and large, it was very seldom that we ever located a target in these first 2 years. There was an analyst who decided he got 600 aiming point pictures, and he was able to analyze these pictures, and he persuaded Churchill that the bomber offensive was very doubtful if it was achieving any more than 3% or even 5% getting within 5 miles of the aiming point.
The analyst's report came as a great shock to RAF High Command. In November 1941, Churchill ordered a virtual halt of all night raids. There were almost no attacks on Germany for 3 months. And then, a major turning point. In February 1942, this man was appointed Chief of Bomber Command.
Press home your attack. If you individually succeed, you will have delivered the most devastating blow against the very vitals of the enemy. Let him have it right on the chin.
A friend of peace or a bringer.
Fluggebieten liegen die durch unsere Luftabwehr vernichteten Feindflugzeuge in großer Zahl zertrümmert am Boden. Gewaltig und zahlenmäßig nicht zu erfassen.
After 2 years of war, the RAF night bomber offensive against Germany had hit an all-time low. The Luftwaffe's so-called Himmelbett defense system, based on a combination of radar-controlled night fighters, searchlights and flak, was inflicting heavy losses. What's more, analysis of RAF target pictures had revealed that most bombs missed by miles. Then, in February 1942, Arthur Harris was made Chief of Bomber Command.
We cannot send 1,000 bombers a time over Germany every time as yet. But the time will come when we can do so.
And he was very much aware that the Navy and the Army were quite determined that they were going to steal all our aircraft because they believed they could use them. The Navy believed they could use them in the western approaches to help them with the submarine menace, and the Army was certain they could use them in the desert where they needed a bomber force desperately. But Arthur Harris, being the number 2 to the Commander-in-Chief of the Air Force, was well aware of these predators.
Harris fought hard for bigger bombers in larger numbers.
It may take a year, it may take 2. But for the Nazis, the writing is on the wall.
And in his wake, 1942 became a year of innovation. First, he devised a new tactic to overwhelm the Himmelbett defense system by sheer weight of numbers, the bomber stream.
Die Antwort der Royal Air Force auf die steigenden Abschüsse der deutschen Nachtjagd war der Bomberstrom, der zum ersten Mal beim 1000-Bomber-Angriff auf Köln am 31. Mai 1942 durchgeführt wurde. Der wenige Kilometer breite Bomberstrom überflog nur wenige Räume, in denen im Himmelbettverfahren Nachtjäger angesetzt werden konnten zur Bekämpfung der Bomber. Es waren einige Dutzend Nachtjäger aufgestiegen, kreisten in ihren Himmelbettzonen und sahen überhaupt keinen einzigen Bomber, vielleicht ein Dutzend, nicht einmal, kam in Kontakt mit den Bombern und siehe da, das System, das Marshall Harris aufgebaut hatte, funktionierte. Es wurden erstaunlich wenig Flugzeuge abgeschossen, obwohl sie immer wieder einen Himmelbettraum durchflogen. Aber sie stießen nur auf 3, 4, 5, 6 Jäger. Und dann war man durch diese Zone durch und man flog relativ gefahrlos.
And Harris put on 1,000 bombers over Cologne and devastated 600 acres of Cologne. And Harris said, that's what the bomber offensive will do from now on. Give me the aircraft and I will give you the most important tool towards winning the war.
But to do this, the bombers needed very accurate navigation, and that meant help from the boffins. They came up with a little black box called G.
It wasn't exactly radar, of course. It was a derivative of pulse technique. And basically, it involved having 3 pulsed transmitters. They sent out synchronized pulses of high power. And at the aircraft, you had a receiver and a very accurate timing source and cathode ray tube presentation on which you could see the 3 signals from these 3 stations. You then, with a timing circuit, measured the delay between station A and B and the delay between station B and C.
Accuracy of G, due to the positioning of the stations that were, the master and slave stations were over in UK, as you extended the distance over to Europe, the position lines became more obtuse, and of course the signal became less prominent. And additionally to that, the Germans were also able to interfere with the signal so that it became difficult to read.
G helped keep the bomber stream on course, but it couldn't pinpoint targets. So, another innovation. The Boffins came up with a radio guidance system similar to that used by the Germans during the Blitz, but this was far more accurate. It was called oboe.
Now, there is one parameter in radar and physics, radar generally, that you can measure very precisely, and that is range. So, oboe capitalized on this. It had 2 widely separated stations. By widely separated, I mean 100 miles or so. The first station, which was called the Cat, guided an airplane on an arc, simply an arc of which the Cat was the center. The airplane flew along this arc, concentric with the Cat, the arc passing over the target that had to be bombed. You now have another signal called the mouse, which signals when to release its bomb. And the theoretical precision of a thing at 200 miles was, I can't remember, something like 200 yards.
The Germans were amazed by this sudden improvement in accuracy.
Einige Fabriken sehr exakt getroffen wurden, konnte man sich bei der deutschen Luftwaffe nicht vorstellen, dass es sich um ein Zielnavigationsverfahren von höchster Präzision handelte. Und man glaubte immer, zumindest zunächst, dass unten in der Stadt, in der Nähe der Fabrik, ein Geheimsender einer Widerstandsorganisation, natürlich meistens wurde gesagt, das sind Kommunisten, die dort sitzen und mit einem Sender Peilsignale geben, um den Bomber heranzurufen.
The oboe system could not control more than a handful of aircraft at any one time, so it was not much use for the giant air fleets which Harris had in mind. But it was a perfect guidance system for a specialist unit set up in August 1942, the Pathfinder Force.
You had finders that would drop flares, and then they would inch onto the target by identifying some specific point on the ground and working their way gradually onto the target. Then eventually, behind the finders, there would be markers, and these markers would drop great pathfinding target markers, brilliant colors of reds and greens and yellows that would mark the target. And then when the target was marked, you would have backers up that would back the markers up and put more of that color down to keep the target illuminated with that particular type of marking, so that when the main force came along and the master bomber said, bomb the greens with red stars, or whichever cluster or whichever type of stars with colors were marking the target. There was always a tendency to drop short of the target, and I used to say on these occasions, only the North Sea stopped Norwich being bombed, because your people would always bomb the fringe of the target, and that meant that the target wasn't being bombed at all. So that meant you had backers up coming on at later stages that would come in and remark the target, and there would be remarkers to remark the remarkers, and that went on throughout the whole period of the raid, which by this time would only be 35 minutes.
Late in 1942, there came one final navigation aid. It didn't need ground control, and so therefore could be carried in every aircraft of the bomber stream, H-2S.
They adapted the radars which they developed for submarine and ship detection to put in bomber aircraft to sweep the ground, so that it scanned forward to the aircraft, got echoes from the ground, put these echoes on the PPI as bright spots, and so you could see, for example, a coastline quite clearly. You could see a large town or lake and so on, and as the system got better and people got more experience with it, they could use it to find places, their targets in Germany.
By the spring of 1943, all the essentials were in place. Massed formations of 4-engined bombers, accurate target marking through pathfinders using oboe, better navigation equipment like G and H-2S. Men like these were ready to launch the greatest aerial bombardment in history.
For a delightful...
By the spring of 1943, RAF Bomber Command was ready to begin the greatest aerial offensive in history. The night-air war was moving towards its final, most devastating phase.
Right, climb on track. Out here to position A, at Texel. You know Texel will be some heavy flak there, but it shouldn't worry you if you're wide awake. Now from A down to B is no trouble, quite straightforward, but make sure that you are south of Bremen and that you are north of Hanover. When you're clear of Hanover, you've got a clear run through to Berlin.
Well, of course, we never knew a thing until we went into briefing. The station commander and the various people did know, but it wasn't until we went into briefing they actually knew where the target was. And so it was quite an expectancy in a way what it was. I used to look around and everybody seemed not laughing and that, and the conversation was always a little bit strained among people. When we were getting our parachutes out and getting ready to go on the aircraft in the bus, people were a little bit strained in what they said. But somehow when you got in the aircraft, got all fastened up and the engines were running and out, you were concentrating on the flight ahead, and so it took it off a lot. But it was just that waiting period when you really gave you time to think and wonder, you know. But everybody went, and on my squadron particularly, we all went. I did hear about 1 or 2 squadrons where they kind of failed a little bit. But my squadron was a good squadron, and we all went. And, so I suppose that had quite a good bearing on everything. But we didn't enjoy it, of course, but we had to do it. And so we went. It's a matter of going.
They flew Stirlings, Halifaxes, Wellingtons and Lancasters, but the experience was much the same. Steve Green flew in Lancasters.
When you got inside, you felt it. You knew it was a powerful machine. Inside there was no trimming or anything like that. It was bare metal and very awkward. The rear gun turret wasn't too bad. You could slide down into that. To get forward, there was all these main spars and bits and pieces getting in the way all the way up. But you had your headset on, of course, which deadened the noise a little bit. But when you started rolling around the world, it was noisy. And when you got airborne and it throttled back, it was a relief. It was a relief to your ears.
On the immediate takeoff, we didn't look for anything as such. We sort of just got our feelings in the plane. But once we sort of got over the sea, we did all the way around scanning. Yeah. At night time, a lot of people seem to think that you could see each other, but you couldn't. All of a sudden you'd be plodding along in the dark and then this big shape would go past you. You hadn't seen it coming. And a lot of people who say they have, I think they're telling stories, as a lot of our lads will tell you themselves. And even with the banking search, it didn't necessarily mean that you could see what was underneath you.
But I would think that the word vigilant was the word right from the word. That was really our main job, vigilant. We were the eyes of the crew. I mean, it was our job to warn them of danger. And as Paul was saying, to say that you see things at night, I think you're lucky if you see anything at 300 yards, more like 50 yards.
I was there in my seat, well strapped in, and the flight engineer would sit next to me. The bomb aimer, my bomb aimer was a navigator too. I had 2 navigators probably. And he would go down to the front and lay on the bomb bay to dispatch the bombs. But the rest of the trip he would go back and sit on the navigator's bench. There was a long bench seat for the navigator. He would sit there with the navigator just behind me.
Well, I was in the mid-upper turret, just there. And I used to call, on the internal intercom, I used to call up the rear gunner and ask him if he was all right. And also he used to call me from his turret to make sure that I was all right. You know, no lack of oxygen or anything like that. And then he would, after another 5 minutes, he'd maybe call me up and ask if I was all right.
I could see from my position on the top of the aircraft, I could see when he got his guns high, I could see the guns moving around, also the end of the turret. Unless it was extremely thick cloud, then I could more or less see him.
You tried don't look at any bright lights. If you were going to, shut one eye, this is what, but don't look at any bright lights if you can help it. But the best way of the lot was not stare. Don't stare into the night. You won't see anything. If you kept your head moving, and I know it sounds odd, but out the corner of your eye, you saw things better out the corner of your eye than you did by staring at something. If you look like this, then you glance.
Over the Dutch coast, too much cloud to see where. I thought as much. Why didn't somebody clean this bloody perspex? It's no good you're alibi on the perspex.
The wireless operator was kept to his position. He was listening out. If he tuned in and heard some German giving signals, he would depress his keys somehow and make an awful noise on top of all that, which would stop them hearing the transmissions from the ground to them, because he wasn't speaking German. But some aircraft, I understand, had an 8th crew member. We had 7. An 8th crew member who spoke German, and he could tune in and speak German and give different instructions, and even swear in German about the British and so on, to really confuse them, think it was a German swearing, you know.
We are now 17 miles off Duisburg. Okay, Ebola. Over to you. Take over. Right, Skipper. Taking over. Taking over.
When you approached the city, there were numerous searchlights. The city was on fire. There was black smoke, anti-aircraft fire. Fortunately, you couldn't hear the anti-aircraft fire, but you could certainly see it and smell it as you were passing through the explosions. The aircraft passing through the explosions, you could smell the cordite and in the aircraft.
My first target was Essen, and I've never had such a fright in my life. If anybody says they weren't scared, that's impossible. Because your aircraft, I mean, let's look at the size of the thing. It used to rock about and shake about, just like a boat on a rough sea, and you could hear the shrapnel rattling on the sides, and you thought, well, this is it, you've no hope.
It's all right, chaps. Everyone all right? No damage here, Skipper. Yes, I'm okay, Skipper, but the stuff's all over the place. Everything seems to be all right back here. I'm okay, Skip, but I think the radio's not for good. Well, it could have been worse. One door's open. Left, left. Steady. Left. Steady. All that.
The bombing run seemed endless. It was like heaven when the bomb aimer said, bomb's gone. Well, you knew anyway because the aircraft rose up from the weight of the bombs gone, and get the hell out of it.
Looking down on the city, there was a mass of colours, beautiful colours, red predominating, and the effect was rather like a cauldron, a soup cauldron, if you like, with a bubbling, where the bubbles represented the explosions of the bombs below.
And lurking in the midst of all this strangely colourful confusion were German night fighters. In 1943, they developed a new tactic designed to hit the bombers in their one blind spot, directly underneath. They called the tactic Schräge Musik, the German word for jazz.
About Schräge Musik with the upwards guns. I prefer the Schräge Musik very much because it gave me the tactical advance always to stay below the plane, the enemy plane. Here you have the two guns, two 2-centimeter guns in this direction, 75 degrees forward, so that you hit the target with the shots at 70 meters below. So he came down, and of course I had to keep the same speed, and then I was going very slowly forward, and with the reflector side I was looking again between the two engines, and then I gave the burst and moved away. Right away, you have to move. We lost several night fighters because in some cases the Lancaster exploded and hit the night fighter, and both went down, like it happened to Hauptmann Friede, a good friend of mine, and two other fellows. Well, move away and look if the ship is burning. If the ship was burning, then we waited in the dark. Not to try another attack, because everybody on board, of course, was alarmed, and they could jump out. And we waited, and in most cases, at least 10, 15 times, it happened to me that the ship went down, and it needed 5 minutes from 18,000 feet until it exploded on the ground. You could not see the parachutes, of course, but, well, and we remarked the spot, and said, Sieg Heil, at that time. So in other words, that the Lancaster was down.
When the gunner report saw a fighter, a night fighter, you said, fighter, fighter. That was the first words you said, fighter, fighter, and where it was. Fighter, fighter, port quarter down, port quarter high, corkscrew, port, go. You always turn your corkscrew towards where you saw the aircraft, and that lessened the chance of him for coming in on you. That, and there was no argument. The captain of the aircraft never queried it, never queried it. You could say, corkscrew port, go, without even giving him any information. If it was that close, he would do it instantly. That was instant.
Now, at night, it was close quarters combat. And the German night fighter with his 20mm cannon couldn't sit off hundreds of yards away or even a mile away and fire at the range of that cannon. He had to come at close quarters, and it was very dangerous for him, because if we saw him and could get a bead on him, as it were, it was we could shoot him down.
Vorher zweimal aus der Me 110 gesprungen. Beim ersten Mal, das war ein Angriff auf Berlin. Und ich hatte also fehlerhaft von unten angegriffen. Der Heckschütze, der anzugreifende, von mir angegriffene Maschine antwortete und zerschoss mir den rechten Motor. Das Flugzeug war nicht mehr flugfähig und wir sprangen. Ich bin dann also, habe relativ früh den Fallschirm geöffnet, und die Situation war insofern unangenehm, weil um mich rum die Royal Air Force und die deutsche Nachtjagd flog. Von oben fielen die Bomben, von unten schoss die Flak. Ich war eigentlich recht froh, als ich in etwa 2000 Meter Höhe aus dieser Eisenhaltchenregion entfernt war.
Nothing
course, we were pleased, but rather tired, and gave our report to the intelligence officer, and that would be it again for the next time. Yes, they were rather trying times, really, but a long time ago now, of course, and get over it.
I think the British bomber air crew were very brave, and they did excellent piloting and excellent navigating. They were flying for hours, and we knew this as night fighters, for hours into foreign country, flying over foreign country every minute, thinking there is a night fighter behind them. They were such good pilots. I remember I saw them making loopings over Berlin to get out of the searchlights. And they made aerobatics like this to get away from the night fight. We admired them.
Then we never gave it much thought. All we knew there were German night fighters there. But nowadays, I'm having had the opportunity to meet them on numerous occasions, and I know it sounds peculiar, but all these night fighter pilots and chaps who shot down dozens of Lancaster, all very little small fellas, and everybody had the impression that all these Germans were great big ginormous men, but they were very small. We'd all pass these people in the night, and they were looking for us. But no, I don't think there was any animosity there at all. And of course, the older you get, things fade, and you think, well, what was it all about anyway? It was a waste of bloody time, wasn't it, when you think about it? All this war.
One of the interviewees in this programme, Group Captain T.G. Mahadi, died last week. He was 86 years old.
A friend of peace or a bringer of war, a great commander or an evil madman, a nation's savior or a continent's destroyer.
Never has a person been so loved and so cursed in just one decade. Never has anyone failed so absolutely.
The man behind the mask revealed in an historic showcase. Hitler, next Sunday from 8 on Discovery Channel.